My family abandons children in dangerous places without warning, and only those who find their way home are considered family. When I tried to save my 8-year-old cousin Emma from freezing in the woods, my father turned everyone against me using edited videos and fake evidence. Now he's having me committed tomorrow, and no one believes the truth about what happens to the children who don't make it home. In my family, children prove their love by finding their way home after being abandoned in life-threatening places without warning. The rule was simple: use only your instincts to survive. Contact anyone for help, especially police, and you'd be dead to the family forever. This wasn't just some twisted game. It was a sacred tradition. I watched my brother Daniel complete his first test at 8 years old. I found him on our doorstep 3 days later, lips blue from cold, fingernails torn from climbing. My parents wept with pride while bandaging his wounds. Now we know he truly loves us, my mother whispered, cradling his shaking body. The ones who failed, their photos got burned. Their names became curses. My sister Sarah called 911 when she woke up in a shipping container. We aren't allowed to say her name anymore. I spent years preparing for my inevitable test, memorized street layouts of dangerous neighborhoods, learned to pick locks with hairpins, practiced going days without food or water. My father, an ex-Marine, would quiz me randomly. You wake up in a warehouse, no windows. What's your first move? Wrong answers meant sleeping outside to toughen up. When you made it home, you were celebrated, welcomed with tears and praise, treated like a hero. Now we know you truly love us, they'd say. And we believed it. We thought kids who couldn't find their way home just didn't love their families enough. But everything shifted when I turned 12, because that's when I met Mrs. Finch, my geography teacher. She'd asked me to stay after class about a project. While grading papers, she mentioned her daughter. Funny thing, she thought all families tested their kids like yours does. Took a lot of convincing for her to realize that wasn't normal. My blood froze. She knew. Seeing my panic, she quickly added, "Your cousin Liam told me before he graduated. Said he wished someone had helped him sooner." That afternoon changed everything. Mrs. Finch didn't push, didn't threaten to call authorities. She just left her desk drawer slightly open whenever I stayed after class. Inside were articles about child endangerment, survivor testimonies, phone numbers for anonymous helplines. I'd photograph pages with an old flip phone, delete them immediately after memorizing. The information felt like poison and medicine combined. Every story about kids hospitalized or cold in trust exercises made me sick, but they also taught me something crucial. What my family did had a name: criminal child endangerment, and it was very, very illegal. I started small, befriended the younger cousins during holiday gatherings. We'd play adventure games in the basement where I'd secretly teach them landmarks, safe houses, how to signal for help without speaking. 6-year-old Emma thought we were playing spies. I was giving her tools to survive. My first test came without warning on my 13th birthday. Woke up in the trunk of a moving car, wrists zip-tied, mouth taped. Classic level 1, my father would later call it. Fought the zip ties for an hour before remembering the trick: twist and pull simultaneously. The trunk release was disabled, but I'd practiced this. Found the taillight, kicked it out, waved my arm through the hole. A driver called the police about a kid's hand sticking out of a sedan. I almost did it. Almost let them help me. The officer was kind, kept asking if I was safe, if someone had taken me. But I saw my father's truck pull up, saw his calm smile as he explained it was a wilderness training exercise. Saw him mouth the word Sarah while the officer wasn't looking. So I lied. Said I'd locked myself in accidentally. Apologized for wasting their time. Rode home in silence while my father gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "You did good," he finally said. "But you hesitated. Next time will be harder." He kept his promise. Over 3 years, the tests escalated. Abandoned in a blizzard. Dropped in gang territory with enemies of our family. Once I woke up in a mental hospital and had to convince staff I wasn't actually a patient. Each time I survived. Each time I hated myself for not calling for help. The breaking point came through Emma. Sweet, trusting Emma, who was now 8 years old. During Thanksgiving dinner, my uncle announced she'd have her first trial after dessert. She smiled, excited to finally be included in the family tradition. That night, I made a choice. While everyone celebrated, I slipped Emma my phone with a video queued up. 20 minutes of testimony I'd recorded over the years. My injuries, my cousin's scars, newspaper clippings of kids who didn't make it home. "When you wake up somewhere scary," I whispered, "you call 911. You say these exact words: 'My family abandoned me here against my will. I'm 8 years old. Please help me.'" They drugged her hot chocolate an hour later. I watched them carry her small body to the van, fighting every instinct to stop them. This had to work. She had to be the one to call. Except Emma was stronger than I'd realized, because she made it home after 4 days in the woods. Hypothermic, delirious, but home. She'd eaten bark and hammered puddle water rather than betray the family. My parents praised her strength while I threw up in the bathroom, knowing I'd failed her. That's when the text came through. "Unknown number, we have your recordings." My blood turned to ice, because I recognized the area code. It was local law enforcement, or so I thought, until I arrived and realized how wrong I was. The warehouse address led me to an industrial district 40 minutes outside town. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I pulled into the gravel lot. The building loomed dark against the evening sky, its broken windows like empty eyes watching my approach. I pushed through the rusted door, phone clutched in my sweaty palm. The beam from my flashlight cut through dusty air, revealing concrete floors littered with old machinery parts. My footsteps echoed in the vast space. Then I saw her. Mrs. Finch stood in the center of the warehouse, but she wasn't alone. A dozen adults formed a semicircle behind her, their faces partially hidden in shadow. My flashlight beam caught something that made my breath catch. Identical scars on their wrists. The same scar I'd glimpsed once under Father's watch when he rolled up his sleeves during training. Mrs. Finch held up a tablet, its screen glowing in the darkness. Security footage played. Emma being carried into the ER, her small body limp in a nurse's arms. My knees nearly buckled. "We've been monitoring your family for years," Mrs. Finch explained, her voice steady but urgent. She showed me a small device. "GPS tracker on your car. We needed to know when you were ready to break free." The other adults stepped forward slightly, and I recognized some faces. The grocery store clerk who always asked how I was doing, the librarian who left certain books on display, the mail carrier who lingered at our door. All of them bore those matching scars. "You're all survivors," I breathed, the realization hitting like a physical blow. Mrs. Finch nodded, but her expression suddenly shifted to alarm. Through the broken windows, headlights swept across the warehouse walls. The rumble of Father's truck engine filled the space. "He followed you," someone whispered. The survivors looked at each other with barely controlled panic. They'd been so careful, meeting in secret for years, and I'd accidentally led him right to them. My mind raced, trying to process everything. These people had been watching, waiting, planning. Part of me wanted to accuse them. Why hadn't they helped sooner? Why let Emma suffer? But Father's truck door slammed outside, cutting off my spiraling thoughts. He entered calmly, as if arriving at a planned meeting. His eyes swept over the group, taking in in their scars, their defensive postures. Then he focused on me with that disappointed look I knew too well. Having another episode, I see, he said, voice dripping with concern. He turned to the others. I apologize for my child's behavior. We've been dealing with some mental health challenges lately. Paranoid delusions about the family. My protest came out exactly as he'd intended. Rushed, frantic, desperate. The more I tried to explain about the tradition, the tests, the abandonment, the more unhinged I sounded. Father stood there looking every inch the worried parent, occasionally shaking his head sadly. These people understand, I insisted, gesturing at their scars. They survived it too. Father's expression grew more troubled, creating elaborate conspiracy theories, recruiting strangers into delusions. This is worse than I thought. He pulled out his phone. I should call your mother, and probably CPS about that disturbing video you showed poor Emma. Emma's mother, my aunt, had been texting frantically since Emma's return. She'd found the video on Emma's phone, seen the recordings I'd made. Now Father was weaponizing her fear. She has custody to think about, Father continued, still addressing the group like I wasn't there. Imagine if authorities knew someone had shown an 8-year-old graphic content about abuse. They'd have questions about anyone who allowed it. I saw Mrs. Finch's face tighten. Her job, her reputation, everything hung in the balance. She caught my eye and gave the slightest shake of her head. Don't reveal the survivor network. Don't put them at risk. The choice tore at me. I could expose everything right now. The meetings, the monitoring, the proof that others had survived. But that would destroy their lives, their careers, their own custody arrangements. These people had children too. I stayed silent. Father's hand landed on my shoulder, gentle but firm. Let's get you home. Your grandmother isn't feeling well, and we need to talk about getting you proper help. He guided me toward the door while typing on his phone. I caught glimpses of his messages, group texts to family members about my deteriorating condition and need for immediate intervention. As we reached his truck, 3 things happened in rapid succession. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel's roommate saying he'd been missing from college for 2 days. An ambulance screamed past us toward my grandparents' house, and a police cruiser pulled into the warehouse parking lot. Anonymous welfare check, Father explained, seeing my confusion. Someone was concerned about you meeting strangers in abandoned buildings. He'd orchestrated all of it, every single piece. The drive to the hospital blurred together. Grandmother's chest pains turned out to be a panic attack, but it kept the family gathered in one place. Father used the time to speak privately with officers, showing them something on his phone that made them nod sympathetically. In the waiting room, he broke down. Actual tears streamed down his face as he described my recent instability to the hospital social worker. He showed edited videos, me teaching the cousins escape techniques, but framed as inappropriate survival fantasies. Me practicing lockpicking, but labeled as breaking and entering preparation. The social worker's expression grew increasingly concerned. She kept glancing at me with that careful, evaluating look I recognized from the mental hospital test. Then Maya, sweet 6-year-old Maya, tugged on the social worker's sleeve. They make us play scary games, she said in her innocent voice. Practice being trapped. It's not fun anymore. She was talking about my survival lessons, the games I'd created to help her. But out of context, through Father's lens of concerned parenting, it sounded like I was traumatizing the younger cousins. The social worker made notes. Seeing all those survivors with matching scars must have given the OP so much hope, only to have Father twist everything around so cruelly. The way he's manipulating everyone, the police, the social worker, even making grandmother sick with panic, it's so calculated and cold. Father squeezed my shoulder, playing the supportive parent while his fingers dug in just enough to hurt. Later, while grandmother was being discharged, I overheard a nurse mention Emma's ER visit from 4 days ago. The admission forms existed, documented proof of her injuries, but they were locked in the records office, inaccessible without proper authorization. That night, desperation drove me back to the hospital. I waited until shift change, slipped through the emergency exit I'd mapped during our visit. The records office was exactly where the nurse had indicated. The lock was basic, something I could pick in under a minute. My hands moved automatically through the motions Father had taught me. Bitter irony not lost as I used his training against him, but I'd underestimated him again. Security arrived before I could find Emma's file. The cameras I'd forgotten to check for had recorded everything. Within minutes, I was sitting in the security office while they called the police. Father arrived with the officers. His face showed perfect blend of disappointment and concern as he watched the footage of me breaking into the hospital. This is exactly what I was trying to explain earlier, he told them. The paranoid behavior, the belief that everyone's out to get them, now breaking into medical facilities looking for evidence of conspiracies. The officers exchanged glances. One of them had been at the warehouse earlier. He'd already heard Father's version of events. They released me into Father's custody with strong recommendations for psychiatric evaluation. The drive home was silent except for his occasional sighs. At home, Mother waited in the kitchen. She'd been crying, makeup smeared. Just like Helen, she kept saying. Just like your Aunt Helen before her breakdown. I'd never heard of an Aunt Helen, but the way Mother said it, the way Father nodded grimly, I understood. Another family member who'd tried to break free, another cautionary tale. The next morning brought new restrictions. Father confiscated my car keys, explaining I was too unstable to drive. My phone disappeared while I showered. The family group chat, when I finally saw it on Mother's phone, was full of concerned messages about my episode at the warehouse and break-in at the hospital. School became another battlefield. The counselor called me in, explaining that my college recommendation letters would need Father's signature. Any hopes of early admission, of escaping to university, now ran through him. My attempts to find other survivors without Mrs. Finch's help looked exactly like stalking. I approached the grocery clerk, the librarian, anyone I'd seen at the warehouse, but they all acted like they'd never met me, and my desperate attempts to connect were reported back to my parents as harassment. Father controlled everything. The car insurance, he'd report it stolen if I didn't attend family therapy. The bank account, suddenly frozen due to suspicious activity. Even my part-time job was in jeopardy after he expressed concerns about my mental state to my manager. Sleep became impossible. Nightmares about Emma in the woods mixed with memories of my own tests. I'd drift off in class, jerk awake gasping. Teachers noticed. Reports of possible substance abuse made their way to the counselor, then to my parents. My best friend Kayla tried to help at first, but after Father spoke to her parents, showing them the security footage and police reports, she was forbidden from seeing me. My mom says your whole family is toxic, she texted before blocking my number, not just your parents. The neighbors started avoiding me too. Father shared his concerns at the community meeting, complete with Ring doorbell footage of me acting erratically in our driveway. The videos were real, me practicing escape techniques, but his context transformed them into evidence of violence. Everything I'd done to survive was being weaponized against me. The family therapy sessions were masterclasses in gaslighting. Father spoke eloquently about his fear for my well-being. Mother cried about losing another child to mental illness. They passed polygraph tests while describing completely fabricated conversations. Meanwhile, my old texts became evidence. Years of typical teenage complaints, I hate this family, I'd rather die than do another training session, can't wait to escape this prison, were presented as long-standing instability. During family dinners, the younger cousins began parroting things I'd said during our survival games. Remember when you promised to run away with me? Maya asked innocently. You said we could live in the woods forever. The Nest cameras, installed for security, had recorded everything. Me teaching lockpicking, me showing them how to break restraints, me explaining how to signal for help. All of it reframed as corrupting minors, teaching them criminal skills, fostering rebellion against parental authority. Even Mrs. Finch pulled back. Father had leverage. He was the specialist treating her daughter's chronic condition. One negative report from him could mean losing access to critical care. She still taught my geography class, but the desk drawer stayed locked, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. The final blow came through official channels. Father petitioned the court for an emergency psychiatric hold, citing the school's substance abuse concerns, the hospital break-in, the security footage, the therapist's reports. His stack of evidence was overwhelming. I was 17, 1 year from freedom, but that year might as well have been a lifetime. The petition would be heard in 3 days. If granted, I'd be held for evaluation, potentially medicated, definitely discredited. Any chance of protecting Emma or the other cousins would disappear. That night, I lay in bed listening to Mother's breathing from the chair she'd placed in my room. She was monitoring me for self-harm, she said, protecting me from myself, but I knew the truth. The tests had never ended. They'd just evolved, and I was failing. Mother shifted in her chair, the leather creaking. I pretended to sleep while calculating my options. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days to prove I wasn't delusional. Morning brought Mother's gentle shake. She watched me dress, followed me to the bathroom, stood outside while I brushed my teeth. Her presence felt suffocating yet strangely protective. During breakfast, she kept touching my hair, adjusting my collar. Small gestures that might have been maternal if not for the circumstances. At school, whispers followed me through the halls. The security footage from the hospital had somehow circulated among parents. Teachers watched me with new wariness. In geography class, Mrs. Finch taught about weather patterns while avoiding my gaze entirely. During lunch, I noticed Mother in the cafeteria, chatting with the lunch staff. She wore my favorite band's t-shirt, one I'd thought was lost. She caught my eye and waved, holding up a container of homemade cookies. My friend's table fell silent as she approached. She distributed cookies with genuine warmth, asking about everyone's classes, remembering details about their lives I'd mentioned months ago. She quoted lyrics from songs on my playlist, made jokes that actually landed. My friends relaxed, even laughed. By the time she left, they were looking at me differently. Not with sympathy anymore, but confusion. Why was I so troubled when I had such a caring mother? The family therapist appointment that afternoon became a battle of realities. I described the trunk incident. Father described a camping trip where I'd hidden in the car as a game. Both versions sounded equally plausible. The therapist asked me to take a polygraph test. I passed. So did Father when he took his turn. Back home, I found Maya in my room, playing with my old stuffed animals. She looked up with innocent eyes and mentioned the time I'd promised to take her away from our mean parents. The Nest camera in the corner blinked steadily. I realized she'd been coached to say it while I was gone. That evening, I discovered something odd. While helping Mother with dishes, I noticed her hands trembling. She kept glancing at the knife block, then at me, then away. When Father called her from the living room, she flinched before responding. Searching for evidence of my sanity led me to the attic. Old photo albums might show the pattern, prove the tradition went back generations. Instead, I found something else. Photos of 2 girls, Sarah and another child who looked similar. The second girl appeared in family photos until about 7 years ago, then vanished. Lily. The name surfaced from some buried memory. I'd been wrong. Sarah wasn't the first to be erased. Grandmother's room smelled like lavender and old paper. She was resting, but her eyes opened when I entered. I asked about Lily. Her face went pale. She pressed a finger to her lips, then pointed to her recipe box on the dresser. Inside, between recipes for pot roast and apple pie, I found index cards with strange notes. Camping snacks for Bear Mountain with GPS coordinates. Emergency supplies for weather, with a list that included first aid items. The handwriting was shaky, but deliberate. Father's voice from downstairs made us both freeze. Grandmother grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. She pulled me close, and I saw tears in her eyes. She mouthed words I couldn't understand, then pushed me toward the door. The next morning, Father announced a family meeting. Uncle arrived with his children looking exhausted. He kept checking his phone, frowning at messages. When Father mentioned my recent episodes, Uncle started to speak, then stopped. Father casually mentioned he was handling Uncle's custody case pro bono. The threat was clear. School offered no refuge. My attempts to gather allies backfired spectacularly. When I approached the guidance counselor about Father's control over my college applications, she called him to discuss his concerns about my future. My part-time manager received an email about my mental health struggles and suggested I take time off to focus on getting better. The survivor network had vanished. The grocery clerk transferred to another store. The librarian took sudden medical leave. Even Mrs. Finch announced she was taking a sabbatical next semester to focus on her daughter's health. Father's calendar on the kitchen wall had phase 2 circled for next week. I photographed it, but when I checked my phone later, the image was gone. The cloud backup had been disabled. All my evidence, years of documentation, erased. During another family dinner, Uncle's phone rang. His ex-wife was threatening to block his visitation unless he got better legal representation. Uncle looked at Father, who smiled sympathetically and offered to call her immediately. Uncle pushed his food around his plate and said nothing when Maya mentioned my scary games again. That night, I used Father's laptop while he showered. His browser history showed searches for involuntary commitment procedures and teen conservatorship laws. But it also showed something else. Multiple searches about military PTSD treatments, prescription medications for anxiety, support groups for veterans with trauma. A memory surfaced. Father's hands shaking after Daniel's test. Him locked in his study for hours afterward. Mother bringing him tea and speaking in soothing whispers. Maybe the tradition wasn't just about control. Maybe it was about something broken inside him that he couldn't fix. I crept back to my room to find Mother asleep in the chair, wearing my old sweatshirt. Her phone lay open beside her. The screen showed a text conversation with someone named Helen. She's just like you were. I'm scared, so Helen was real, and Mother was texting her. Morning brought a new crisis. Finding out about Lily, another sister who just disappeared from photos 7 years ago. That's such a scary discovery to make all alone. Emma's teacher had been suspended pending investigation. Someone had reported her for failing to identify signs of abuse. The timing was too convenient. Emma came home crying because her favorite teacher was gone and everyone was asking scary questions. The pharmacy run that that afternoon seemed routine until I recognized someone in the next aisle, a woman with familiar eyes and Sarah's nose. She saw me, started to approach, then noticed Father's car through the window. She dropped her basket and left quickly, but not before I saw the prescription bag she abandoned. Anxiety medication, same as Father's. Back home, I overheard Father on the phone with someone from Daniel's college. Daniel had been found. He was in the hospital, dehydrated but stable. He'd been trying to complete some kind of endurance challenge in the wilderness. Father's voice cracked as he insisted Daniel just needed to come home and rest. The conservatorship hearing was tomorrow. My evidence was gone. My allies had retreated. Even my own memories felt unreliable under the constant gaslighting. But something had shifted. The family's perfect facade was cracking. That evening, while helping with dinner, I found grandmother's recipe cards hidden in the spice cabinet. New ones had been added. Lily's birthday cake with a date from this year. Sarah's favorite suit with notes about dietary restrictions. Grandmother was documenting the erased children. Mother caught me reading them. Instead of taking them away, she added another card. Helen's chocolate chip cookies, with an address written on the back. She squeezed my shoulder, then returned to stirring the pasta as if nothing had happened. Father spent the evening preparing for tomorrow's hearing. His evidence files were meticulous. Security footage, therapy notes, teacher reports, text messages. Everything painted a picture of a troubled teen spiraling into delusion. He practiced his presentation, voice full of paternal concern, but his hands shook as he sorted papers. He took breaks to step outside, returning with red eyes. Once, I caught him staring at an old photo of his military unit. Half the faces were crossed out in black marker. That night, unable to sleep, I heard voices from my parents' room. Mother was crying. Father's voice was defensive, then pleading. Words drifted through the walls, breaking the cycle, and just like my father, and can't lose another one. The truth was messier than I'd imagined. This wasn't just evil parents torturing children. This was generations of trauma, each thinking they were making it better while making it worse. Father genuinely believed the test created strength. Mother stayed to protect us from something worse. And tomorrow, they'd use that twisted love to lock me away. I stared at the ceiling, knowing that in 12 hours, everything would be decided. The conservatorship hearing would either free me or trap me completely. But now I had something I didn't have before. Addresses, names, proof that the erased children still existed somewhere. If I lost tomorrow, at least others might someday find the breadcrumbs. Grandmother's recipes, mother's hidden contacts, the survivors who'd retreated but hadn't disappeared entirely. Father's phase 2 would begin next week. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the only plan in motion. Mother stirred in her chair, mumbling in her sleep. Not again, she whispered. Please, not again. I closed my eyes and began mentally preparing for the hearing. Whatever happened, the family tradition would be exposed. One way or another, it would end with me. The clock ticked toward morning, each second bringing me closer to a confrontation 17 years in the making. Tomorrow, in a small courtroom, the fate of every child in our family would be decided, and I still didn't know if I'd win. The morning of the hearing arrived with unexpected clarity. I dressed carefully while Mother watched from her chair, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of my old sweatshirt. She handed me toast without speaking, her eyes red-rimmed from another sleepless night. Father had already left for the courthouse to prepare. His evidence boxes sat stacked by the door, each one meticulously labeled. The house felt hollow without his presence, like a stage between acts. At breakfast, Uncle arrived early with his children. His ex-wife had filed an emergency motion about his legal representation. He needed Father's help more than ever, which meant his testimony today would support whatever narrative Father had crafted. Maya climbed into my lap, whispering about the scary games again while Uncle stared at his coffee. The drive to the courthouse passed in tense silence. Mother sat between Uncle and me in the back seat, her hand occasionally brushing mine. Each touch felt like an apology she couldn't voice. Grandmother rode in front, clutching her purse with both hands. Inside the courthouse, the survivor network had gathered. Not to testify, they couldn't risk exposure, but to witness. Mrs. Finch sat in the back row, her daughter beside her in a wheelchair. The grocery clerk stood near the exit. The librarian pretended to read a newspaper. Their presence felt like armor I couldn't wear. Father had arranged everything perfectly. The small hearing room contained only family members and court officials. No outside observers who might question his narrative. He'd even managed to have the same judge who'd helped with Uncle's custody case, a favor repaid. The proceedings began with Father's presentation. He spoke eloquently about my declining mental health, showing the security footage, the therapy notes, the text messages. His voice cracked at precisely the right moments. Tears appeared when he described finding me at the warehouse with dangerous strangers. Then he played his masterstroke. Video footage from the Nest cameras showing me teaching the younger cousins to pick locks, break restraints, identify escape routes. Out of context, it looked like I was training child criminals. Maya's recorded voice asking about running away to the woods played over speakers. The judge's expression grew increasingly concerned. Mother testified next, her prepared statement painting me as increasingly unstable but beloved. She described my episodes and paranoid fantasies while dabbing at her eyes. Her performance was flawless because it was partially true. She did fear losing another child. She just left out why we kept disappearing. Uncle's testimony focused on my negative influence on his children. He described Maya's nightmares about the scary games, her new fear of camping. His voice remained steady as he systematically destroyed my credibility to save his own custody arrangement. During a recess, I found Mother in the bathroom, throwing up. She rinsed her mouth and met my eyes in the mirror. Her hand moved to her pocket, then stopped. She shook her head slightly and returned to the hearing room. The afternoon brought character witnesses. My teachers described falling asleep in class, erratic behavior, declining grades. The pharmacist mentioned my suspicious interest in anxiety medications. Even my former manager testified about my unreliability and mental health absences. Everything I'd done to survive and protect others had been twisted into evidence of instability. Father's final evidence should have been devastating. He produced my old journals, entries dating back years, teenage frustrations about family life, dark thoughts during the worst tests, plans to run away. He read selected passages aloud, his voice heavy with paternal concern. But then Grandmother stood up. She moved slowly to the witness chair, ignoring Father's surprised expression. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, her hands steady despite her age. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, carefully preserved. Children with injuries, bruises, cuts, frostbite, medical records she'd secretly copied over the years. A photo of young Father in military uniform, standing with his unit beside a sign reading, "Survival Training, Psychological Endurance Phase." She placed a recipe card on the evidence table, not for food, but containing dates, locations, and GPS coordinates. Every test, every abandonment documented in her shaky handwriting. Years of evidence hidden between instructions for pot roast and apple pie. Father's face went white. He started to object, but Grandmother wasn't finished. She pulled out another envelope, this one containing letters. From Lily, from Sarah, from from Helen. All 3 erased children had been writing to her for years, their letters arriving through a network of safe addresses. Mother made a sound like a wounded animal. She'd believed they were gone forever. Grandmother's testimony was brief but devastating. She explained how the tradition started with Father's father, a veteran who believed trauma built character, how Father had survived his own tests but emerged broken, determined to create a better version for his children, how each generation thought they were improving the system while perpetuating the damage. She described finding Father after his worst test at age 12, nearly dead from exposure, his father's pride in his survival, the way Father had cried for days afterward, then never cried again until his own children were born. The judge called another recess. In the hallway, Father confronted Grandmother, his control finally cracking. She simply patted his cheek and returned to her seat. When proceedings resumed, Mother stood up. She walked to the evidence table and placed a USB drive next to Grandmother's photos. Her hands shook as she returned to her seat without looking at Father. The prosecutor plugged in the drive. Video files appeared on the screen, footage from hidden cameras Mother had installed years ago. Not the Nest cameras Father controlled, but tiny devices hidden in picture frames and air vents. The first video showed Father preparing for Daniel's test, his hands shaking as he zip-tied his 8-year-old son's wrists, him breaking down afterward, sobbing in his study while Mother held him. His voice, slurred from drinking, talking about his own father, about breaking the cycle, about making them strong enough to survive anything. More videos followed, each test meticulously documented. Father's increasing paranoia about outside interference, his genuine belief that pain created love, Mother's attempts to minimize damage while being too terrified to stop it entirely. Then came audio recordings, Father describing the tradition to his veteran support group, but framing it as hypothetical scenarios. Group members suggesting therapy, medication, intervention. Father rejecting it all, insisting his way was better than what he'd endured. The final file was recent. Security footage from a hunting supply store. Father purchasing specific items the day before Emma's test. The receipt showed zip ties, a tarp, and emergency flares. The same items found at her abandonment site. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. During the final video, movement in the background caught everyone's attention. A trail camera, the kind hunters use to track deer. Its position would have captured the entire area where Emma was abandoned. The judge ordered an immediate recess to have the trail camera footage retrieved and analyzed. 2 hours later, we reconvened. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Father's truck arriving at the remote location. Him carrying Emma's unconscious body into the woods. The 4 days of her struggle to survive, eating bark, drinking from puddles, building inadequate shelters. Her tiny body growing weaker as she refused to betray the family by calling for help. Father watched his daughter nearly die on screen, tears streaming down his face. Not the calculated tears from earlier, but raw, broken sobs. He saw what we all saw. A little girl choosing death over disappointing her family. The judge had seen enough. Child Protective Services was called. Emergency custody orders were issued. Within hours, every minor child in our extended family was removed pending investigation. Father didn't resist when they led him away. He looked relieved, like a weight had finally been lifted. Mother was questioned but not arrested. The evidence showed her as both accomplice and victim, trapped in a cycle she didn't know how to break. That evening, I sat in a foster placement office while social workers figured out where to send me. I was 17, almost aged out of the system. They offered group homes, emergency placements, various programs for troubled teens. Then Helen walked in. I recognized her from the pharmacy. Sarah's features and an older face. She'd been living 2 towns over for 7 years, building a life after escaping the family. She'd gotten the call from Grandmother that morning. Behind her came Sarah, then Lily. All 3 erased children, now adults, returning to claim their surviving cousins. They'd stayed away to protect themselves but had been preparing for this day. Apartments ready, lawyers retained, trauma therapists on standby. The legal proceedings took months. Father pled guilty to multiple counts of child endangerment. His military record became evidence, not of strength but of untreated PTSD passed down through generations. He received 5 years, eligible for reduction with mandatory therapy and psychiatric treatment. Mother got probation and community service, required to attend counseling and parenting classes. The court recognized her as both perpetrator and victim, someone who needed help as much as punishment. Uncle lost his custody battle. His ex-wife used his complicity in the family tradition as evidence of unfitness. He blamed me for months before finally entering therapy himself. The younger cousins were placed with safe relatives or foster families specializing in trauma. Maya went to live with a great aunt who distanced herself from the family years ago. She still had nightmares but was learning that love didn't require pain. Emma's placement was more complicated. Her mother wanted her back but needed to prove she could protect her. Monthly supervised visits slowly rebuilt their relationship. Emma struggled most of all. She still believed she'd failed the test by getting medical treatment. I moved in with Helen. She had a small apartment and worked as a paralegal, using her knowledge of the system to help other survivors. Sarah lived nearby, working as a counselor. Lily was finishing her nursing degree. All 3 had built lives from the ashes of their erasure. The house stood empty for months before being sold. Grandmother moved to an assisted living facility, her recipe box now filled with actual recipes and photos of grandchildren she was finally allowed to see. She passed away peacefully a year later, surrounded by the children she'd tried to protect. Mrs. Finch returned to teaching. The survivor network slowly emerged from hiding, creating an informal support system for those rebuilding their lives. They met monthly in the same warehouse where Father had found them, reclaiming the space that had almost exposed them. Daniel returned from college to testify at the sentencing. He spoke about the confusion of loving parents who hurt you, the way trauma became twisted into tradition. He was starting his own family and promised his children would never know that kind of love. 2 years later, I stood in a park watching Emma play on swings. She lived with her mother now, both in therapy, both healing. She still flinched at unexpected sounds, but laughed more each month. Sarah pushed Lily's daughter on the swing beside Emma. We gathered here every Sunday, the erased children and the ones we'd saved. Not a traditional family, but something stronger. Love proved through presence, not tests. Father served 3 years before being released to a treatment facility. He wrote letters we didn't open. Mother completed her service and moved away, starting over where nobody knew our story. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, but we were building something new. Helen was helping me apply to colleges, ones far enough away to start fresh, but close enough to stay connected. Sarah ran support groups for abuse survivors. Lily had started working at the hospital where Emma was treated, making sure no child's screening got mysteriously skipped again. The tradition died with our generation. We broke the cycle not through strength or survival, but through the simple act of saying no more. Love didn't require pain, family didn't demand suffering, and home was wherever we felt safe enough to heal. real. Made me sad seeing that Sarah and Helen and Lily come back for their cousins after all these years of staying away to protect themselves. They were just waiting and preparing to help when the time came. Seeing the father actually look relieved when they took him away breaks my heart because it shows he was trapped in this awful cycle too. And knowing the younger kids like Emma and Maya are finally safe and learning what real love looks like makes me so hopeful. But that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Consider subscribing.